Welcome to episode 22 of Touchstones Music, my series of music and albums from the 1960s that I purchased around the time they were first released, in which I've been musical touchstones for me ever since. We've talked about already the explosion of new music that the 60s really engulfed the world with. And in England, one band was particularly being noticed by fans, both for their creativity and their musicianship. They were a band that featured both tough blues rock guitars and flute. Not an instant pairing, I would say, that I would have expected, but boy, did it ever work. In 1969, JETHRO TULL released their second album, Stand Up. Before we get going, let's hear a quick cut from that. Arguably, maybe the most famous song off the album. It's called A New Day Yesterday.
My first and last time with you, and we had some fun.
Well, that gives you an idea about the tough guitar part anyway. Okay, let's talk about the band. Now, this is a band that has gone through a lot of personnel changes over the years. A lot. At this time, the band consisted of the one consistent player throughout the whole of JETHRO TULL's career, Ian Anderson on vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, and also has done most of the writing. Martin Barr, sometimes called Barre, but I call him Martin Barr, on electric guitar. The wonderful Glenn Cornick and Clive Bunker on bass and drums. In my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, rhythm section JETHRO TULL has ever fielded, or anybody has ever fielded. These two are superb musicians. And young though they were in those days, as we all were, they were already really, really good. JETHRO TULL formed in Luton and Bedfordshire in England in 1967, and they originally played a mix of blues and jazz. They took the name of an 18th century English agriculturalist. I thought it was a reference to Dickens or something, but I was wrong. I looked it up. After gaining a following playing London clubs, they released their first album, This Was. So after a 3-month U.S. tour, the band returned to the U.K. to record their second album at Olympic Studios in London. There's a picture of it there, and we've talked about Olympic before. It was a very popular studio at that time for rock bands. This would be the first album to feature their new guitarist, Martin Barr, because their original guitarist, who was on the first album, named Mick Abrams, a very good blues player, by the way, left the group due to creative differences after the recording of the first album. So it was recorded between April and May of 1969 at both Morgan and Olympic Studios in London. Chief engineer Andy Johns, very famous engineer, by the way, so they had some good people behind the board there. It was released in July of 1969, a reprise in the U.S. and Island labels, Island label in the U.K., and hit number 20 on the U.S. Billboard 200 albums chart, which is very respectable, and, very importantly, number 1 in the U.K., so they were really starting to get noticed in the U.K. They had a single out called Bure, but this was the era where the musicians in particular were really focusing on albums. They weren't interested in singles anymore. Singles got still put out from the albums, but they weren't really the focus, at least for the musicians who were making the albums. So the album title and the album cover. The cover, well, we already talked about the, we will. The cover was designed by James Grasho, an American woodcut artist. The original cover was a gatefold style. What that means is there was a pop-up inside, like in a children's book, that popped up when you opened up the gatefold. And hence the names Stand Up. Now, mine shows the original drawing. That popped up in the original. The copies that I had didn't do that. It was still gatefold and still opened up, but it didn't have a pop-up in it. I purchased the album sometime during the winter of 1969-70, as I recall. Now, as a guitar player myself, I especially loved and still love Martin Barr's guitar work on the album. I saw Tull live in 1976. So by that time, they released 9 studio albums. The set list was drawn from most of those albums, and the only song from the Stand Up album that I recall them doing was A New Day Yesterday, which fortunately was one of my favorites. There was a couple of others I wish they'd have done that I don't recall them doing, but my memory's a little hazy. Let's look at what was on the album. So on the vinyl, on the first side, first song was A New Day Yesterday. Also, their single Bure was on there. Let's hear a little bit from Bure. Now, remember, this is an instrumental, so we're not going to be hearing any singing here. What we do here is some very nice work on the rhythm section, and also a little bit of Ian Anderson's flute. I was not a fan of flute until I heard Ian Anderson play it, and since then he's made me a fan, especially of his playing. Side 2 included a song which you're going to hear cut from, which is my second favorite on the album, We Used to Know. Now, as most people know by now, I am a sucker for wah pedal, and there's some wonderful wah pedal on this. Although this is not an instrumental, the portion we're going to hear is an instrumental portion of the song. I love everything about the way he's playing guitar there. I love the tone he's getting. I love the lyrical way the song, the passage flows. I just love everything about that. Over time, the band added influences from English folk, classical, and, of course, rock music, and eventually developed a progressive rock style that was uniquely their own. Throughout the numerous personnel changes, TULL has consistently maintained a very high level of creativity and musicianship. This album has been another one of my touchstones since I purchased it, and I hope it will be for other music fans as well. Well, that's all for this edition. Who says I can't be brief? As always, until next time, be well, and thanks for joining me.